When we think about a modern city, its glorious skyline of office towers will likely be among the first things that come to our minds. Since the late 19th century, these tall buildings have been the architectural representation of the pinnacles of our achievements. On the other hand, when we consider the life in the modern city, it goes way beyond the boundary of the office. In the city, we work, but we also recreate. We learn and we're entertained. We spend some time alone and some time meeting with the others. Since technologies such as wireless communication and portable computing being fully integrated into people's lives, the boundaries between these activities have started to disappear. For example, coffee shops in America have become popular places for many who work on their laptops. Surely some of them are startup entrepreneurs who cannot afford the rent of an office space. However, for others who do have their office somewhere in the city may still prefer to work at these coffee shops. Again, because of the wireless internet and laptop, their place of work can also be their favorite place to hang out. Although often overlooked, the emergence of this type of attitude has posed a great threat to traditional workplaces. It is reported that 40% of the IBM employees do not work in their company offices on a regular basis. And other companies such as Cisco is running offices with an underutilization rate as high as 60%. As architects, it is scary for us to realize that one day these coffee shops might be triumphant over our sophisticatedly designed office buildings as the 21st century workplace of choice. On the other hand, we must admit that due to our negligence of the rapid change in people's work method, the workplace design has become increasingly insufficient for today's work. We are now at a critical junction in history where we desperately need to redefine workplace so that it can better accommodate the lifestyles of today's workers. Before we start designing the newest workplace typology, I believe it is important for us to first understand how it was developed in history. Although offices have existed since long before, hosting a collection of offices in a distinct building has only been practiced for a little bit more than a century. In the pre-modern era, the scale of business was often small and there wasn't much of a distinction between business ownership and management. Therefore, office was usually a room inside the owner's house or other estates. In the late 19th century, due to the separation of ownership and management and the increase in the mental labor, more of these offices were grouped together and became a distinct type of building. The first skyscrapers appeared around then. In the early 20th century, the growth of the paper industry led to the expansion of the number of white-collar workers, influenced by the scientific management principles of Frederick Taylor, who believed that the workers' specialization in repeated tasks increases efficiency. No surprise that the office layout at the time was modeled after the factory assembly lines in large, open-plan buildings. The partition walls between the workstations disappeared to ensure that the workers were constantly under the surveillance of their managers. Originated in Germany in the early 1960s, Quick Borner team developed a system of office organizations called the Bürolandschaft. In this system, office furniture was laid out in an organic pattern determined by careful studies of the workflow as well as the communication patterns. Also, it's worth mentioning that because the office workers at the time were much less dependent on their employers than those of the earlier century due to having new social legislations passed in their favor, as a result, the authority of management became more limited, and the workers started to enjoy benefits such as taking a break at their own pace in designated areas within the building. When the system was brought to the US, furniture company Herman Miller took the opportunity and introduced a modular office furniture system known as the Action Office. The organizational principle behind the Action Office was really the same as the Bürolandschaft, but with more partitions and standardized furniture. However, the beautiful vision of promoting communication soon went awry in the 70s, when the industrial production works in the US were outsourced to less developed countries. The numbers of the white collars and the middle managers grew rapidly. In order to fit all these people into a limited space, the Action Office soon became the seats of cubicles, an office standard that is still commonly seen today. These cubicles are highly resilient because they can fit in virtually every building configurations. Therefore, since then, how people work at their workstation was no longer a consideration for architects when we design workplaces. Rather, we put most of our attention into building technologies and sustainability. Although other forms of office layout such as combi office and casual office have been developed, office buildings today are still designed following the same three assumptions. First is that work is produced, stored, and transferred through tangible media. Second is that people collaborate only through physical communication. The third is that most of the work and communication is done within the same building. Even without any further studies, we already intuitively know that a big part of these assumptions are no longer the case today. Because of the types of work varies from industry to industry, this project will focus on the company Facebook and the social media sector not only because they are native to the 21st century, but they also represent the new work style and the attitude which determine the workplace design of the future. Facebook is currently a company with roughly 4,000 employees, 12 departments, and with offices and data centers distributed in 40 cities across the world. Its employees from these different parts of the world communicate and collaborate together to build the largest social network entity on the internet. Facebook has just expanded its engineering branch into New York City in early 2012. Although Facebook has not revealed the exact number of the engineers they would hire, based on the previous experience in Seattle, where the number of engineers grew from 3 to 90 in just 18 months, we can certainly expect a significant presence in the city soon to arrive. The employees of Facebook are mostly what we refer to today as the knowledge workers. Knowledge workers are those whose primary tasks are non-routine problem-solving using non-linear creative thinking. The resources needed for their work are primarily the knowledge of their own as well as from other sources such as the internet and their colleagues. For Facebook employees today, the means of acquiring knowledge from these sources include downloading, emailing, and instant messaging. After assimilating the knowledge, they can use it to work and produce, say, another piece of program code or a new design of an icon. Eventually, the work will be uploaded to the server or emailed or IM'd to their colleagues, and the cycle will repeat itself. If we compare the tools needed for communication, production, storage, and work exchange that the knowledge workers use today to their current office conditions, it is obvious that the current offices are designed with a different set of tools in mind. Small wonder that more knowledge workers are starting to realize that they don't really need their offices anymore. What they do need, however, is a flexible schedule and a flexible place to work. Numerous companies today, including Facebook, has already adapted the flexible time policy, meaning the employees have their freedom on choosing when to do their work. So what if the office is distributed across the city and the employees can choose where they work? Let's take a look at the schedule of a real Facebook employee on his typical day and try to imagine his day without the constraint of any particular building. Software engineer Joe has as part of the company's office an individual workstation at the northeast corner of Bryant Park. He arrives to work at 10 o'clock in the morning and starts to do some coding. At 11:17, he felt like he could really use some coffee, so he looked up the cafes around him and decided to go to the one in the public library with his laptop so that he can still get some work done while he's there. Lunchtime for him is 12:50 today. Again, he chose one of the places nearby. At 2 p.m., he went to the salsa class at his gym near the Grand Central Station. And afterward, he decided to visit his friend and colleague Jane, whose station is nearby, and together they worked on some code review. After another brief coffee break around 4:30 and some more coding, Joe and Jane decided to go to eat dinner at a Portuguese restaurant at 6. Finally, Joe returned to his own workstation and was absorbed in his work until 9 p.m. This idea of giving employees freedom during their workdays is certainly not new. A study conducted by IBM in 1996 has indicated that if the employees thought that they had their choices on where and when they work, they not only had less difficulties in their work-life balance, but also they tended to be willing to work longer. Google, among many of today's prominent IT companies, has realized the importance of helping its employees achieving their work-life balance by integrating perks into its workplaces. Some of these perks include free laundry and haircuts in the office, free lunch and dinner and snacks, and also entertainment such as video games and ping pong. Google's headquarters in New York City, for example, is in a large open-plan building with rooms and individual workstations scattered across the floors. A generous amount of the square footage in this building is dedicated for the perks. One may argue that Google is attempting to create a miniature city within its building, and they even went as far as painting the street scene onto the walls and putting food trucks inside the building. However, the downfalls of this type of office is obvious. On one hand, this 2.9 million square feet miniature city cost the company $1.9 billion to renovate. That's not including the maintenance and operation cost while it's being used, nor considering any possible expansion or downsizing of the company in the future. On the other hand, from the employee's perspective, working in this building is not so different from being plugged into the matrix, because both are providing people with necessities and a false sense of freedom, so that the people do not have to worry about anything but their work. Recently this year, Facebook is extending its headquarters in Menlo Park, California, from the current East Campus onto the newly acquired 22-acre West Campus, and the architect Frank Gehry is commissioned for the design. Similar to the Google office in New York City, the design of the West Campus building is also a large open space filled with individual desks as well as group spaces and areas for perks. While looking at the current proposal for the building, one cannot help but to be reminded of the Bürolandschaft layout back in the 60s, where in both cases it was believed that a large open plan and organic desk layout can stimulate collaboration. However, according to the journalist Craig Duff from the Time magazine during his visit to the Facebook headquarters, these open areas are actually quote-unquote eerily quiet, where hundreds of workers were absorbed in work at their individual stations. Where conversations do happen is in places like the cafeterias and the war rooms. To understand what the war rooms are, we first have to understand the organizational structure of Facebook. Like many other companies, Facebook also have managers and regular employees within each department. However, unlike most companies, where the employees report to their manager who approves or disapproves their work before reporting to a higher manager. Usually the managers in Facebook do not approve anything. Instead, they give feedbacks, allocate resources, and oftentimes contribute to the projects themselves. Another special aspect of Facebook is that the company operates by project teams. In each project team, there are usually several software engineers, one product manager, few designers, and data analysts. The teams are usually small, around 5 to 10 people, and very flexible for changes. Again, in many cases, the managers also work with the rest of their teams. Each project team makes decisions about their product on their own, pending only on the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg's approval. Therefore, many Facebook employees describe the project teams as many little companies within a large company. When a project is close to its date for launch, its team will move to an area of the building called the war room. In the war rooms, team members can collaborate with each other either closely or to shout across the room, without worrying about interrupting people outside the team. The war rooms are indeed the nuclei of Facebook's workplace because they help strengthening the current organizational structure of the company by generating a sense of camaraderie between the team members. And this sense of camaraderie will eventually generate a sense of project ownership for each individual on the team. Thus, they will become more intrinsically motivated and productive. Ultimately, it can be concluded that Facebook's new office in New York City needs to satisfy 3 general requirements. First, it needs to accommodate the personal needs of the employees and to encourage casual encounters and conversations. Secondly, it needs to facilitate concentrated individual work. And lastly, it needs to provide war rooms for the project teams. Of course, we can always put all 3 requirements under the same roof, like in the previous examples of Google New York and Facebook Menlo Park. However, such large buildings often come with problems such as being overly reliant on electrical lighting, mechanical HVAC, not mentioning the astronomical real estate investments, and the inflexibility for change. And sooner the employees would realize that they only have a very limited freedom in such work environments. Therefore, we have to consider the alternative model for Facebook's new office in New York City, which is distributing these programmatic requirements across the city. For example, the personal needs of the employees can be accommodated by the cafes, restaurants, gyms, and other facilities that already exist in the city. The employees may also choose to do their individual works at these places, and they can even post updates on Facebook to attract their colleagues to work at the same place. For those who require further seclusion at any moment, they can use booths that can be allocated upon demand throughout the city. And finally, the nuclei of Facebook's distributed workplace, the war rooms, are structures that facilitate the teams of 5 to 15 people. They can either be separate structures that interact with the city, or they can take up existing vacant buildings or structures. Although the final forms of these places and structures are still to be designed, the idea is that the employees of Facebook in New York City can roam freely between them. Their personal lives and their work lives will be moments that are constantly integrating and intercepting each other within the city, and I believe this is the way of the workers of the 21st century.